Now, more stories, insights, and analysis of Illinois policy and politics. This is Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Once again, your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Welcome back to Illinois Rising. I'm Pat Hughes of the Illinois Opportunity Project, filling in for the great Dan Proft. Joining me this week is Austin Berg, who's a great writer for the Illinois Policy Institute and a columnist for the Illinois News Network. And I want to talk about the work that Austin has done on some very important topics, specifically following up on our last segment where we were talking about Senator Lightford and her desire to get paid. All of that, I think, Austin, comes from this mentality of entitlement and power and control that is really housed on not Senator Lightford's side, but on the side of the Illinois House, which is Speaker Mike Madigan, and as most of our listeners know, and anyone who doesn't, has been in power for just about 40 years, and we've seen what that power results in. But Austin, you've done some extremely interesting work and written some columns about how Mike Madigan came to be in power and sort of a structure that people might not recognize as much. Can you talk a little bit about that circumstance?
Sure. So at the Illinois Policy Institute, we do a lot of work on a lot of different topics. And the most common question we get day after day after day after day is, what can I do about Mike Madigan? And that speaks to the amount of power that he has in Illinois, is that no one's asking as many questions about actual policy issues. They're asking about the power of one person. So I decided to go out and dig through the archives of some local newspapers in Chicago and sort of track the rise of Mike Madigan through the ranks and see what that says about his leadership. And spoiler alert, it's not really about policies that better the state. It's more about political power. So he was able to rise to the speakership in the early 1980s after the 1980 census came out. And those numbers were a disaster for Illinois Democrats because you saw Chicago hemorrhaging people and you saw the suburbs gaining a lot of people. And obviously Chicago is the Democrat power base. So right after the census, every 10 years, you see lawmakers go through the process of remapping the legislative districts of the state. And that's done with a panel of 8 people. There's 4 Democrats, 4 Republicans. Now, if they can't come to an agreement on how maps should be drawn, surprise, they do not ever come to an agreement on how maps should be drawn, they draw a name out of a hat, and that is the tie-breaking member of the panel. And in that year, in 1981, they drew a name out of the hat, and the name was a former Democrat governor, Shapiro. Now, Madigan at that time was the House leader. He was not Speaker yet. But at that point, he also became map maker in chief, and Madigan drew maps like nobody's business. So Chicago was entitled to, due to those declining population numbers, was entitled to about 15 Senate seats and 31 House seats. Under Madigan's map, they got 19 Senate seats, 37 House seats. Now, doubling down on that, the year before, Pat Quinn actually led an effort to cut down on the number of legislators in the House. So you had 59 House reps without being cut back. 43 of those 59 seats lost due to Madigan's map belonged to the GOP. So Madigan became king on that day when he made that map, and the Tribune heralded the arrival of the biggest political mastermind in Illinois history.
And here's a little anecdote. First of all, that story is incredible because it how happenstance sort of plays into history. But also, who you said they pulled names out of a hat. Whose hat was it?
Well, Pat, it was Abe Lincoln's hat, as if the state is, sometimes we see it as a parody of itself, but that story is almost mythical. So
our greatest political figure basically birthed our most notorious political figure through his hat all these years later. And the other thing I find interesting about this story is the time frame of it and the players. I mean, you're talking about Mike Madigan and Pat Quinn in 1980. I was 11 years old. It was like, I don't know how long until you were going to be born. And this is how long. I don't think people have a fundamental understanding of just how long this has been going on. I mean, think about 1980. That's like, you know, the hostage crisis. Ronald Reagan was elected for the first time. The Olympic hockey team won. I mean, like when you see old videos of any of those things, it looks like it's from another place, literally another place in time. But this is where this all started and the continuum of that to this day.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, in 1983, you had people were playing Thriller on an 8-track, and we have an 8-track Speaker of the House now. You had like Fraggle Rock and He-Man, all these things that seem so out of place if you see them today, just as you said. But because there aren't term limits, because Madigan has consolidated his power so much that those won't pass in Illinois until he's gone, he's been able to maintain that power regardless of how times have changed. I mean, the guy doesn't have a cell phone. The guy doesn't use email. How has that person been able to maintain power for that long? And that's sort of the second piece that we started researching at Illinois Policy, was the way in which he is able to control the rulemaking process. So when people ask us, what can I do about Mike Madigan? Well, the first thing is that if you live in a Democrat district, your representative is voting for him for Speaker every 2 years. That is the vote that he needs most. And if you look back into the 80s, 90s, 2000s, you see articles written again and again and again where people on the inside said the most important vote to Madigan, beyond his own district, which he wins every time, is, will you vote for me for Speaker? And he's happy to make it as easy as possible for House reps to vote for him to lead them into battle.
Yeah, and I think there's just a disconnect amongst the electorate. I think that if the electorate fully understood and embraced what you just discussed in this segment and how it's gotten us to this place, if they understood it, and hopefully they're paying attention and they will understand, that would be the time where this could finally end.